Cannabis has been part of America's history since the nation's birth. Hemp was a popular plant worldwide in the 18th century. Even George Washington was familiar with it. He believed hemp was a valuable crop, much like cotton, and encouraged farmers to grow cannabis for its value as a fiber. Farmers from Kentucky to South Carolina grew hemp to make a variety of products, including threads, textiles, rope, and paper. It was even used to make boat sails for the U.S. Navy. Soon, cannabis, the same plant used to produce hemp materials, was used for its other properties, both for its medicinal and psychoactive effects. By the middle of the 1800s, cannabis extract was found in countless compounded medicines made available to the public. These soothing syrups often included not only cannabis extract, but also morphine, chloroform, and cocaine. They were frequently given to children on doctors' orders. Cannabis maintained its reputation as medicine until immigrants from Mexico arrived in the United States, fleeing the Mexican Revolution, which began in 1910. With them, they brought the practice of smoking marijuana recreationally. Soon, marijuana was associated with immigrants. Prejudice against them led to Americans fearing the marijuana menace. As the Great Depression of the 1930s loomed, many Americans blamed Mexican immigrants for the rise in unemployment, and, by association, cannabis was also to blame. Jazz musicians of the time were also famous for smoking marijuana. Many jazz musicians credited the drug for inspiring their new improvisational style. Louis Armstrong famously favored cannabis over liquor, saying the plant brought him peace while alcohol clouded his judgment. References to vipers, reefer, and gauge peppered jazz music, sometimes inspiring whole songs like Cab Calloway's Reefer Man. But jazz was a genre created by black musicians, and just like we saw earlier, the influence of cannabis was viewed with prejudice and suspicion. Harry Anslinger started his career in government working for the Bureau of Prohibition and soon after founded the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Initially, the FBN was more concerned with collecting taxes on marijuana rather than vilifying recreational use. The Treasury Department wanted revenue. After various international drug conferences targeted the regulation of drugs, Anslinger suggested that marijuana was the cause of violence, unrest, and organized crime. Cannabis was further regulated by the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which levied taxes on all parties growing and distributing cannabis, from farmers to physicians. These taxes, along with increasing anti-cannabis sentiment, led to a decline in the popularity of the drug. Anti-marijuana propaganda found its way into newspapers and onto posters. Cannabis use was soon viewed as unseemly, something only ne'er-do-wells would partake in. In 1936, the movie Tell Your Children, otherwise known as Reefer Madness, was released. The movie follows Jack, a teenage boy who gets caught up with the wrong crowd, hanging out with washed-up drug dealers, smoking pot, and dancing into oblivion. By the end of the movie, Jack narrowly escapes being charged with the murder of his girlfriend May. Reefer madness struck fear in the hearts of many Americans, and cannabis use was sent further underground, though it certainly did not disappear. In the middle of the 20th century, cannabis was still used recreationally, and its use by popular counterculture figures promoted it as a peace-inducing substance. Beat poet Allen Ginsberg wrote about cannabis in several articles in the 1960s, blaming the government for its role in prejudicial legislation. Musicians like Bob Marley also spoke up for the plant's benefits. citing it as a peacemaker. Peace was top of mind for the hippies of the 1960s and 70s. Their cries for the legalization of marijuana was often paired with anti-war protests. Smoking pot was associated with so-called dirty hippies and demonstrations. Washington, D.C. certainly took notice. Nixon arrived at the White House in 1969. 2 years later, he declared drug use public enemy number one, thus started the war on drugs. During his presidency, the Controlled Substance Act of 1970 was implemented. Cannabis was designated a Schedule I drug, deemed to have no currently accepted medical use and high potential for abuse. A couple of years later, the Drug Enforcement Administration, known as the DEA, was created. A brief reprieve under President Jimmy Carter saw work towards decriminalization. But that effort was quickly erased once Ronald Reagan took office in 1981. Reagan called for jail sentences for those convicted of cannabis charges. His wife Nancy developed the Just Say No campaign, which promoted its messages with ads and school programs. Marijuana arrests rose, disproportionately affecting Black people and other minorities. Black neighborhoods were the subject of police and DEA raids. As the crackdown continued, prison populations were on the rise, more than doubling over the next 20 years. Black inmates far outnumbered white inmates despite only making up 12% of the American population. High prison rates continued into the 21st century. Cannabis, of course, remained quite popular. California cannabis proponents campaigned for compassionate medical use, a proposition that was passed in 1996. A few other states followed, despite cannabis still being illegal on the federal level. But the American people eased their opinion on marijuana, and it slowly started gaining broader acceptance. In 2012, Washington and Colorado legalized the sale of recreational cannabis. Other states soon followed. Those still in prison or with criminal records because of personal possession charges began seeking pardons and case dismissals. In 2023, President Joe Biden pardoned thousands of people of their charges, giving them better career opportunities and a clean slate. By the beginning of 2025, 26 states have passed bills permitting some form of cannabis purchase and use. Many more states have legalization bills in the pipeline. While cannabis has gone mainstream, it remains illegal at the federal level. Until the government legislates changes, cannabis remains a Schedule I drug.